Hello everyone and welcome to the second video news post for Thrawn's Revenge Imperial Civil War. For those of you who haven't seen the updates like this before, we are trying out a system where we do a video version and a text version of all of our news posts. So if you prefer to read them, there's a link in the description to the text version of this news post. If you prefer the video version, you can keep watching this one. It is the same information. But before we get into the actual news for the mod, we want to first thank everyone for all their support so far throughout the Mod of the Year competition, which is currently going on Mod Database. With your support, we managed to make it into the top 100 once again with all three mods, so Imperial Civil War and Ascendancy, as well as our new mod, Fall of the Republic. Or not new, but our newly resurrected mod, Fall of the Republic. So if you would like to continue supporting us in this competition, if you feel like any of the three mods have earned your vote for this year, you can vote for as many mods as you like. So you can vote for one of the three, you can vote for all three, you can vote for none of the three, and a bunch of other mods that you like. But the links to do that are in the description here. There's a link for each one of the mods. You just click on the button, and then that'll bring you to the page where the voting actually is. You click on the vote button next to the mod. And yeah, so if you want to vote for us again, we'd really appreciate your support. But if not, we hope we can earn your vote for next year, and hope you enjoy the mods anyways. But we will move on to the actual news post here for the mod. This will be probably a bit shorter in the video version than they'll normally work out to being, but this is also some stuff that we've covered a little bit throughout the playthrough videos that I've been doing on this channel. But we've done a lot of news posts that sort of talk about the new content or changes to content, but not so much about the mechanical changes or necessarily addressing some of the things we've changed in response to certain feedback we've received over the years about 2.15 and previous versions. So that's what we're going to be doing here. I'm going to break it down into a couple different points, and we'll talk about that. So the first point, the number of projectiles in the mod and some other factors that make it feel a bit more arcadey and reduce the visual quality of the mod. So one of the more common complaints about the mod is just the way that our representative system worked, where we represented all the weapons on a ship based on, we'd break it usually into a hard point, and then the hard point could fire up to 10 shots, and that would represent every single weapon on the ship. But the result of that was that you'd get these giant sheets of turbo laser fire, which wasn't super visually appealing. It could be a little confusing to watch, and it made the combat feel a little arcadey. So we definitely agree with that assessment, and one of the things we've done in 2.2 is we've reduced the hardpoint count, or not the hardpoint count, but the projectile count to about a quarter to a third, which significantly clears that up. We're still thinking about reducing it a bit more, but it makes the battles look a lot cleaner, a lot more cinematic. It really helps the visual fidelity of the mod and the way it feels in terms of the combat style. There's also been a net increase in the amount of hardpoint health, which does help with the pacing as well as make it feel a bit less arcadey, while still keeping the same general combat flow for the mod. So that is one of the things we've changed there. So even the SSDs, while they still have a lot of hard points and put out a lot of firepower, it's not quite the same as the giant sheets of lasers that you'd be used to from 2.15. So, part 2. Lack of abilities and similar ranges for all the units contribute to a feeling that there's not much unit diversity in the mod in terms of actual role as there could be. Also, why are the Praetor's weapon ranges so long, and TIE Defender spam? So to address the second last part first there, the reason that the Praetors were given such high range in 2.1 was we were trying to mitigate the tendency for ships to spin when they can't use as many weapons as they'd like. So the ships in Empire at War are essentially always trying to use as much firepower as they can. They're trying to turn towards their bank with the most firepower. And sometimes that would mean larger ships, if their weapons at the back can't reach as much as their weapons on the front can, they'd start to spin a bit more, and that was why we made the Praetor's range longer. However, the trade-off in terms of balance wasn't really worth it, so we're reducing that. We're reducing the range to about average for units. They'll probably have a slightly below average range, really, for what you'd expect from a regular ship, because it is supposed to be a ship that's more of a damage sink, but they ended up acting as like really high defense snipers in previous versions, which was obviously not their intended role. So they've been nerfed in that way. So their new range will reflect that. And ships in the mod in general will have a lot bigger range of ranges. So you'll have ships like the Majestic, which are meant to be that sort of long range, fragile sniper. Stuff like broadside cruisers, torpedo spheres that are filling that role as well. And there'll just be a bit more weapon diversity or weapon range diversity, and as well as weapon diversity. So the modifiers for different damage types against different shield and armor types have been changed, which is part of why the proton torpedoes are so much more effective against larger ships now. We're also splitting the concussion missiles into anti-fighter versions and anti-ship versions. So just in general, you should be finding that different ships are able to do a broader range of different things. The other point there is that TIE Defender spam and Furion spam for the Empire of the Hand, the superiority fighters like that used to be one of the more common tactics, to just spam them as much as possible. And that has been reduced in power in the same way that we've tried to increase the smaller ship power as well. So ships like the Nebulon B, Carrack, all that stuff should be a bit more useful proportionally, partially because of the weapon type changes I just mentioned. So there will be some smaller ships that have some heavier anti-ship weapons and that are less vulnerable to things like bomber fire than their larger counterparts. But we also adjusted it so the population count in the mod is now 60 for space battles instead of 40. The cost of mainline ships is still scaled the same way. So your ISDs will be taking 6 pop cap instead of 4. So that's still, you can fit in 10 of them. And we've used that extra space below the ISD, the range of 1 to 6 instead of 1 to 4, or I guess 1 to 5 instead of 1 to 3, to spread out the pop cap cost of these smaller frigates. So it's no longer that you're almost using as much pop cap for a Carrack as for something like a Dreadnought, or then another step up would be a VSD. It's still probably a bit closer than we'd like, so we might experiment with spreading that out a bit more in the future as well. But it certainly does make it feel less bad to use that population cap on those smaller ships. So that should certainly help make your fleets a little more diverse without any of the drawbacks, and take advantage of some of the extra weapon loadouts and weapon effects that you'll be seeing in 2.2. And so the last point there will be abilities. So abilities are something that weren't super common in the base mod, or in 2.15, and they've been given another look in 2.2. We never really liked the idea of just using power to weapons on every ship and then renaming it on some. So what we've done is we are still going to be using a lot of the base abilities in various places, of course, but we've started introducing our own custom abilities as well. So that's where you get things like the micro jump ability, the single unit retreat ability, the boarding ability where you can capture ships, and also the ability to rotate space stations on command. So if your Golans are facing a direction you don't like, you can rotate them. That was actually suggested in a YouTube comment by Chris. And in future versions, we're going to be working on implementing even more abilities. They are a little bit more work intensive, and so if there's any ideas you have for abilities you'd like to see in the mod, feel free to suggest them in the comments. We do read everything, and we might be able to work them in. So there's stuff like the World Devastator abilities that are going to be more ship specific, and then there'll be other more general abilities like the micro jump or the single unit retreat abilities. But that is something that we want to broaden use of throughout the mod. So the next section there is AI improvements. So in previous versions, we didn't edit the AI from the base game very much beyond adding necessary tags for the AI to use our new units. There are a few technical reasons for that. So if you didn't have the mod packed into meg files, which we didn't even know would work at the time, you would have to install the AI changes to the base data folder, which made an extra step during installation, which is already a complicated process for some people. And it's also why you run into some problems with people who have, for example, Republic at War installed or AOTR, where the AI changes for that will sometimes break and then cause the AI not to work in other mods or the base game. So we never wanted to sort of compound that problem that exists in the AEW community. So we held off on doing any significant AI reworking, but now that we know how to properly handle that, we can do it all within the mods folder. And with some of the changes to the Steam version, it's even easier. But so we're able to start reworking some AI behaviors. We'll be starting that in 2.2, but then a lot of the work will also be saved until 2.3 for that. So one behavior that we've changed already is the tendency for ships to just park under defensive structures and sort of just get picked off by your own ships. So now they have a set range that when enemy ships start coming within that, they'll start responding to them a bit more. They want to stay within range of their defensive structures so they can get help from them, but they are going to come out and properly engage your units. And the other behaviors that we're working on or focusing on for 2.2 are the way that the AI handles corvettes and fighters. So with the base AI code, the AI is essentially told to use the fighters and corvettes to scout the map, which is, it's always good to have information, but that's kind of useless because your fighters and your corvettes, your ability to get fighter superiority is very important in battles, and the AI is not taking full advantage of that, which is another reason why SSDs used to be so powerful, especially when used by the player, because the SSDs are more vulnerable to fighters and bombers, but they aren't being used properly by the AI, so you're never really at risk of losing them. So that brings us to our next point, which is complaints about the SSD, in that they are just too powerful and too common, and once you get them, it's too easy to win. So this is something that we've taken fairly seriously in 2.2, trying to address. When you fight an SSD or use an SSD, it's supposed to feel like it's a somewhat rare thing and somewhat cool, and you're taking a risk using this kind of battle strategy, or if you take them down, it should feel like an accomplishment instead of something that you're doing every battle. So in 2.15, they were kind of everywhere, and once you got them, you could essentially win any engagement. So we made several changes to address this. First, the build limits are significantly reduced. So the typical cap for an SSD at one time is just to have one, and then if you lose it, you can rebuild it up to twice, so which is a lifetime total of 3. The exception to this are belters, which we're probably going to allow 2 or 3 at a time with a lifetime cap of 4 because they are smaller ships, they're not as powerful. We've also made it so that their weaknesses are a bit more pronounced and making it easier to take them down with proper tactics. And just as importantly, easier to lose for players so that they don't guarantee a win in the GC. So they become significantly more vulnerable to bombers, which combined with the AI's proper usage of them makes it so you need to defend them a lot more and can't just drop them in and like immediately win a battle against a large fleet. We've also added engine hardpoints to the SSDs, which makes it easier to take them out if they're down to like 5 HPs. They can't just retreat automatically anymore, because that was something that was pretty annoying about the previous versions. But now SSDs are part of a specific type of strategy. They're good ships against other capital ships. They're good against other SSDs, but or they're, I guess, neutral against other SSDs depending on the type and the loadout. Sovereigns are obviously very good against large single targets, whereas they're worse against smaller frigates. So it's a kind of thing where instead of it just being like the answer is always bring an SSD, what we're trying to work towards is, and what I feel like we've gotten much closer to, is a place where if you want to have that kind of power in your fleet, you've got to be fighting certain types of things, and you've got to pick which engagements you're actually using them in. And also, if you see an enemy SSD, there's some clear answers to that. So that should help those feel a lot more rare, a lot more powerful when they're in their moments of power, but also a lot more obvious vulnerabilities. So the next part is the air system. So we know there are some concerns about the air system in the existing versions for especially new players who don't quite understand how it works and thinks it's supposed to be identical to a tech system, and they wonder why do I have to give up my hero to progress in tech? When it's not really, that's not the case. You're trying to stop them from killing your hero. But anyway, the next news post will actually be exclusively about the air progressive GCs and changes to the air system. I just wanted to bring up that we know there are some concerns with that, and that it doesn't feel, or in our opinion at least, it doesn't have as much story involvement as it should in 2.1, but a lot of that is changing, and we are going to talk about that in the next video, or in the next news post, which will have its own video. So the last point we want to talk about with this particular news post is the criticism that everything moves really fast in ground battles, and that feels really weird. So our attitude towards ground battles in previous versions was that they were bad, and they weren't entirely fixable, so we weren't even going to try, which was a terrible attitude to have. We were just going to make them as painless as possible and make them quicker and move on like that. So we essentially, I want to say, did a 50 to 100% increase in unit speed. So it's certainly a valid criticism of the existing versions. It's something that I'm not particularly happy we did. But this won't be that change, as you can probably tell from the way I'm talking about it, has been reversed. Everything's back to a normal speed. And we will be putting a lot more focus into ground stuff. So we've done some balancing changes and some other changes in 2.2, like we went through, and we reduced the repetition in maps for one thing by adding in a bunch of new ones, a bunch of converted ones from base game story missions. We've added back in the base game maps for GC into other planets where they're suitable. We've added in some of our own new maps that a couple people have been making. So Rogue Leader's been making a lot of new maps for us. Night Raven submitted a new map, and then I'm probably going to try to make 1 or 2 before release. But we've gotten it to a point where most maps are only used on 1 or 2 planets. There are, I think, 5 planets or 5 maps that are used in 3 places, but we're going to be trying to reduce that as much as possible. So across the next few versions even, you could get to a point where everything has its own unique map. Or maybe not exactly that, but where like 2 is the max. And that's a very realistic goal, I think. And especially with Fall of the Republic, there's going to be a lot of new maps that come in for planets that need unique maps. So that'll be helpful. We've made the balance changes, like I said, and we reverted that original change. So in 2.3, we want to do a bit more thorough retooling of some ground systems. We'll talk about that a bit more once we actually hit 2.3. We're not 100% fleshed out on what we want to do there, because obviously we're not at 2.3 yet, but we'll be talking about that fairly early on in 2.3, I think. So obviously this isn't an extensive or not an exhaustive list of changes for 2.2. Hopefully it's relieved some concerns for some people, or maybe people who didn't like 2.1. Hopefully it's convinced you to give 2.2 another shot from us. We're always looking for ways to improve the mod, though, and we're always happy to hear feedback, both during development and afterwards for the next versions. So far, though, we do have to say we're very happy with the direction we're going with 2.2 and with what we have planned for 2.3. So we hope you guys enjoyed as well. And that's going to do it for now. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And again, if you haven't voted for a mod of the year and you want to vote for one of us or one of our mods, we'd appreciate it. If you want to look in the description there's a link to that. And also, we will be doing a community match in 2.15 on the channel here. So that'll actually be on the Twitch channel for Corey Loses, which is at twitch.tv/Corey Loses. There's a link in the description for that as well. That'll be on Thursday night. So if you want to come and play some multiplayer matches in 2.15, head over. We have a Discord server as well. There's a link to that in the description as well. But yeah, so thanks for watching, everyone. Hopefully this has been informative or at least marginally interesting. So see you next time.